Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the podcast. I've got an incredible guest that I'm really, really grateful and excited to be chatting with today. I'm chatting with Dr. John Demartini. He has read over 30,000 books. He has been researching and teaching in the area of self-development and human behavior for the last 4 decades. He's an author of over 40 books himself, two of which that I've read have completely changed the way I view the world, and we'll probably tie into that a little bit later. His teachings on human behavior has impacted millions of people globally with his signature program, The Breakthrough Experience, well known for his roles in documentaries such as The Secret, plus so much more, which you guys will hear in this podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome my guest, Dr. John Demartini. How are you, John? Thank you for joining me.
Hey, Lewis, I'm doing great. Thank you for inviting me on. Thank you.
I'm really honestly, I was just telling you before we started, you've been arguably my biggest mentor and teacher in my short journey so far, and I'm just really looking forward to having an amazing conversation with you today. What I would love to hear from you and for my listeners and everyone that's listening to this and watching this on YouTube is I'd love to hear your story. I've heard it before, but I'd love to hear it again, and just I guess the story of how you became who you are today.
In a short answer,
You can go as long as you want. We've got an hour here. You can take the whole time if you want, but to go as detailed as you please.
Well, I'll try to make it as brief. I don't want to go too long on it, but I had learning challenges as a child. I was told in first grade that I would never be able to read, write, communicate, every amount of thing, never go very far in life by my first grade teacher from my parents. I made it through elementary school by asking smart kids questions,
Nice.
Which I'm kind of known for, my questions today. That worked until I was 12. My parents moved from Houston, Texas to Richmond, Texas when I was 12. And when I started school there, I didn't have a smart group of kids because we lived in a very low socioeconomic area. And I didn't have anybody to ask questions to, and I failed and dropped out. So I left home when I was 13 and kind of became a street kid. And at 14, I decided I was going to go and surf in first California and eventually Hawaii, because Texas was not the surf capital in the world, and I had picked up the sport of surfing.
Awesome.
Schooling was not my expertise because I couldn't read and write and speak properly. I had a speech impediment as a child and also dyslexia. And so I hitchhiked to California when I was 14 and eventually hitchhiked down into Mexico, and wherever there was surf along the coast of California and Mexico, I was surfing. And then at 15, I panhandled enough money to get over to Hawaii and flew to LAX to Honolulu and lived under a bridge at Sunset Beach and Kamehameha Highway. And then I lived in, from there it was too noisy. I lived in a park, under a park bench. I lived in a bathroom when it rained, and an abandoned car that I found, and eventually a tent. So I kept social climbing. And then I had a near-death, experience. I was surfing and I almost died. And in the recovery of that process, that led me to a little class that I never attended beforehand by Paul C. Bragg, who was doing a presentation. And in one night, this one man inspired me to believe that I could overcome my learning problems and eventually learn how to read and write and speak properly. And my life changed that night. I had a dream to be intelligent and a teacher. I never thought I was going to be intelligent. I thought I'd be savvy surfer intelligent, but not academic intelligent. But that night I had a dream to become a teacher and travel the world and go around the world and teach and become intelligent, read and learn. And that led me to fly back to LA, hitchhike back to Texas, take a GED, which is a high school equivalency because I never finished high school. Miraculously, with guessing, passed a test that was unbelievable. I attempted to go to college then. And when I got there, I didn't have that luck on the passing of a test. And I got a 27. I needed 72 to pass. I got 27. I guess the dyslexia had the numbers backwards. And I almost gave up on the idea of being intelligent. And I was thinking about going to surfing, but my mom found me crying in the living room after failing the test. And she said something to me that changed my life big time. She said, son, whether you become a great teacher and travel the world like you dream, or whether you go back to ride giant waves in Hawaii, or whether you return to the streets, I just want to let you know that your father and I are going to love you no matter what. And when I heard that, that was exactly what I needed. And I had this determination at that moment I said to myself, I want to master this thing called studying and learning and reading. And I want to master this thing called speaking and teaching. And I'm going to do whatever it takes, travel whatever distance and pay whatever price to give my service of love across the planet. And I got up and hugged my mom and went in my room, and I got a dictionary out and I started memorizing, 30 words a day in the dictionary. I'd read the word, spell the word, write the word, pronounce the word. And I did that over and over and over and over until I could be tested on 30 words a day. And I had to do them flawlessly. I didn't go to bed. And my vocabulary grew. If you do that for 2 years, pretty steadily, you get 20,000 words in your head. And that was allowing me to then eventually pass school and eventually excel. And then I just couldn't help but want to learn. I started reading encyclopedias and reading in dictionaries. And when I was turning 19, my mom said, what do you want for your birthday? Because I was starting to learn to read. My vocabulary was kicking into gear. And I said, I want the greatest teachings on the face of the earth, the greatest writings humanity has ever created from around the world, from the greatest minds. She said, are you sure you don't want a t-shirt? I said, no, Mom, I want great text. And so in the process of doing that, pardon me for this thing, somebody's trying to reach me on the phone. So I'm just going to have to let it ring here. Pardon me.
That's okay.
I wasn't expecting a ring here.
You're a
so
man.
Pardon me a second.
You're a well-wanted man.
Well, I'm on my ship and I don't get calls too much on the ship, but anyway. In the process of doing it, I asked my mom, I want that. And she contacted her brother, who is a professor at MIT. And he sent 2 giant 6 by 6 by 6 foot wooden crates on a flatbed truck to our home, filled with thousands of books. And I literally went out there with a crowbar and opened them up and filled my room with books, and had a little yoga mat in the center and where I could see the window. And I just started to read, and any word I didn't understand, I had the dictionaries and the encyclopedias, and I just started to grow my vocabulary. And I started reading. If I wasn't in school, driving reading, or reading in class, or reading in the library, I was home reading. And I started reading, 18 to 20 hours a day, usually 20 hours a day. And I just grew my vocabulary, and I just started devouring it. I kept asking what worked and what didn't work to make my reading more efficient. Eventually that sped up and I got to be a real speed reader. I used to read sometimes, 40 to 70 books in a week. And I started to devour literature, and that just kept going and kept going. And today I started speaking, and people started asking me questions. I started teaching. And then by the time I got to the University of Houston, my teaching career started to occur. I was doing yoga out under the trees, and people would gather around and start asking questions because they hadn't seen a bunch of yogis sitting under a tree. And 100, 120, 150, sometimes 400 people would gather around, and I'd have a following of students daily. When I went on to professional school, I kept that 7 days a week teaching procedure, and I got out into practice. I did the same thing. I started teaching every night, and today I'm teaching every day as I travel the world. And now I've been blessed to teach in 163 countries, and it's now 50 years. This is the 50th year since all that.
That's incredible.
And, I have no desire to do anything but research, write, and teach. So I read, write, and teach every day. I've delegated everything else off my plate. I don't have any other responsibilities. I haven't cooked since I was 24. I haven't driven a car in 32 years. I have my own pilot, my own captain, and I have everything delegated. So cleaning, everything, cooking, everything is delegated. So I just teach, research, and write, and travel. So So I'm a firm believer that if you prioritize your life and delegate everything else, you can do something that serves vast numbers of people and do something you really love to do in life. I love helping people structure their life so they can be inspired by their life. That's what I love. That's what the whole purpose of learning all of that is, for that objective.
I love that, John. There's 10 different ways I wanted to take that as you were talking. I literally wrote down the word delegate as you said the word. I guess where I would like to start it, and I guess from my experience anyways, with the people I've worked with and the clients and the audience that I have, is I find a lot of people, they take on stories such as what you had experienced when you were younger. You can't read, can't write, you'll never read again, never write again. And they use those stories as limitations forever. Like I got diagnosed with Asperger's on the autistic spectrum when I was younger, socially awkward, couldn't make friends, all that stuff. And it back before I was conscious of probably your work is the work that really nailed it for me, like learning balance, learning that there's always an equal and opposite to everything, and being able to rewire myself. That's what was able to turn it around for me. I'm just curious from your side of things, how would you help I guess, the average person or the majority of people who have limitations that they're not good enough, that they'll never be smart, never be successful, they're not good at relationships, love is painful, whatever beliefs that they pick up, money is evil, whatever the ones they picked up growing up. How do you work with people to really get them to see the other side and get them to not use that as a limitation for the rest of their life?
Well, I could go through each one of those. Every human being lives by a set of priorities, a set of values, things that are most to least important in their life. And whatever that set of values is, it's unique to them. It's like a fingerprint. And if they fill their day with the very highest priority things, they will spontaneously, intrinsically act and excel. If they attempt to live on lower values, they will require extrinsic motivation to get them to move and act, because they'll procrastinate, hesitate, and frustrate instead of being disciplined, reliable, and focused. So the first thing that an individual can do to reduce the probability of being swayed by these illusions about who they are is to first identify who they are. And your identity revolves around what you value most. So my highest value is teaching. My identity revolves around teaching. I'm a teacher. And researcher writer. So those are the top three of my values, top 2, 3 of them. So your life and identity, your ontological identity wraps around that top value in your life. Your teleological purpose revolves around that. And so if you can start to fill your day with the very highest priority actions that are most meaningful and important to you, what your life really demonstrates you love and are spontaneously great at, and build momentum in that direction by keeping to high priorities. I learned from Mary Kay Cosmetics. I asked her, what advice could you give a young guy who wants to travel the world and speak? And she said, every day, write down the 6 or 7 highest priority actions you can do that day that can help you fulfill your dream. And then identify out of those, which is the highest priorities of the highest priorities of the highest priorities over time. And in my case, it became research, write, travel, teach. So then I decided, well, teaching is number one, and researching and writing come together, and traveling. So I figured, okay, I live on a ship that travels the world. I teach from Zoom, and I research and write during the day. And I just structured my life, and I made a decision that I'm not going to do anything less than what I dream about. How are you going to live your dreams? How are you going to be inspired if you're not doing what's absolutely most inspiring? It's your dream. So that meant I needed to find people around me that would love to do the things that need to be done that I could delegate. And I also had the responsibility of doing something that served people so I could be remunerated in a fair, sustainable way, and leverage that where I can get paid handsomely to be able to pay for those people I'm delegating, so I can move on to be an inspired exemplar of what's possible in human behavior. And I did. I started prioritizing my life. I started delegating. I started taking anything that happened to me and my perceptions and asked, how is it helping me fulfill this? So I took command of my perceptions. Instead of saying, well, I'm a victim of this, I say, well, whatever it is, how is it on the way, not in the way? And I started to see things from a perspective, because the greatest thing you have in life is you have control of your perception, decisions, and actions. So I started prioritizing my action, prioritizing my decisions, prioritizing my perceptions. And if a person does that, if an individual does that, I guarantee you that they don't accumulate more and more baggage. The only reason people beat themselves up is they compare themselves to other people they put on pedestals, and they exaggerate others and minimize them. And Albert Einstein warned against this. He said, if you're a cat trying to swim like a fish, you're going to beat yourself up because you're not going to be great at it. Or if you're a fish trying to climb a tree like a cat, you're going to beat yourself up. But if you honor who you are and look at who your identity is, your highest values, and pursue that and get great at it and become, that one thing that you want to become master at, you'll build momentum that'll be unstoppable, that nobody can interfere with. And you won't be comparing yourself to people. You only compare yourself to people when you're actually not living by highest values and are unfulfilled and go into the amygdala where you judge. When you're inspired in your executive center, you're objective and you're balanced and you're resilient and adaptable, and you're taking actions in a way that you're not interested in judging people. You're too busy doing what you love. When you're doing something you're inspired by, you're not likely to judge. And anytime you judge somebody and put them on a pedestal and minimize yourself, you're going to want to try to live in their values, which is futile. Anytime you minimize somebody and exaggerate yourself, you're going to try to get them to live in your values, which is futile. But if you just love people and do something you love every day and you're resilient, you're not trying to fix people. You're not trying to fix yourself. You're just being your authentic self, doing what you love. And you give people the permission to do the same. And you surround yourself with people that love doing what you want to delegate, which helps the economy, it helps the economics, allows you to produce more and serve more, and everybody wins. So I'm a firm believer in identifying what your highest values are. That's why on my website, I have the value determination process so people can do that free and privately, and then start to structure their life around it. It's not rocket science. It's really not that difficult. But what we do is we subordinate to the world around us, and we inject the values of everybody else, which clouds the clarity of what we want to dedicate our life to. And then what we end up doing, being second at somebody else instead of first to who you are. And then we're worried about rejection from those people, not fitting in, and we try to fit in instead of stand out. We become part of the herd instead of get heard. And as a result of it, we dilute our potential instead of live, with a real actualized state of mind. So I'm a firm believer in prioritizing your life on a daily basis and giving yourself permission to shine, not shrink.
I wanted to ask something as you were talking there. It's like I love the way how you said it's not that complicated. It's not that confusing. Get clear on your values, delegate the rest, fair and equitable exchange of what it is that you do, prioritize what you do. And then as you're talking, I was just picturing like those people, but you don't understand, John, you don't understand. I've got this, my mother wasn't there for me. I was abandoned. I was abused as a child. I guess from your experience, how is it that you bring that level of consciousness to someone who might be listening right now and be like, oh, that sounds great, John, but you don't understand. You don't know what I've been through. You don't then they come up with whatever the story is. I'd just love to know from you, how do you maybe challenge them or hold them accountable or get them to see, I know the divine order in things, as I've seen you write in your books. How do you do that so elegantly, repeatedly, over again without miss? Because I've seen you do it before.
I tell them, I said, how's your life working with that belief system and that story? Because I never found stories of blame ever get you anywhere. So I just say, look, if you want to run that story, then fine. I teach the breakthrough experience. I've taught it 1,142 times. And when people come there, I'm assuming that they're ready to grow. If they're gonna, I tell them to go home. If you're gonna play little baby here, and you go home. You're not ready just go home. Here's your money back. Get out of here. I'm not gonna sit there and let somebody who wants to play victim all their life hold the group back from moving forward. I'll kick their butt a bit, but if they're just wanting to run that story and run their racket, I just say, go home. Here's your money back. When you're ready to come and grow, then I'm here. But I tell them, I said, listen, if you want to run a story that your mommy wasn't there, that's not how to run your life. The question you want to ask is, what specific trait, action, inaction did your mommy display or demonstrate that you perceive is now missing, that you admired and you now miss? And write it down. And what else? And write it down and write them all down and get everything that you think you missed. And then go in there and at the exact moment that you last saw them delivering that to you, because you got to make sure it's real, because it could be just their own delusion. Who provided it? One or many, male or female, close or distant, virtual, real, self or other, who took on that trait? Because no trait is ever gone. It's just changed in form. And then I make them aware of where it is. And then they go, whoa, I didn't realize it. When my mother disappeared, my aunt took over, or my best friend's mother took over, my teacher took over, my sister took over, or I took on some of those trades, or my father took on some of those mothering trades. And then I said, now that you identified quantitatively where everybody, all that's accounted for, you realize nothing's missing. Now, what's the benefit of the new people taking it on? And what was the drawback if your mom had taken it on? Because as long as you're holding on to a fantasy how it should have been and could have been and would have been, you're never going to appreciate your life. So I go in there and I crack the fantasy that they have by finding the drawbacks. And then I find the benefit of the new people. And almost when people get that done, when they're finished with that, there's no grief of loss. There's no running of a story. There's an honoring of the transformation that occurred in their life. And so they don't have to be victims of history anymore. They're masters of destiny. So the quality of their life is based on the quality of the questions they ask. So if they don't want to run that, if they're not willing to work and they don't want to do that, and they want to run there, that means they're getting more advantage out of playing the victim than they are getting advantage by growing. And when they're ready to get more advantage out of that, I'm there for them. But I'm not going to sit there and spend my day interfered with people that want to work with somebody that doesn't want to work, doesn't want to grow. So I hold them accountable. And when they say, well, this thing happened to me, great. I had a group of people bring me a young boy who was suicidal, tried to commit suicide a number of times, blamed all kinds of things. I mean, he had this psychologist got into his ear and said, well, you've been this and your mommy did this. And the kid was just inundated with psychological psychobabble about how and why he was the way he was, and put labels on people and everything else. And he was, his mom left him, and his dad was a drug addict and this and that. And I went in and I said, do you know how to do the internet? And he goes, yeah. I said, you know how to look up stuff on Google? Yeah, get on Google. And he pulls up Google on the computer. And I said, now go in and type in there orphans that lost their mother. Famous orphans that lost their mother. Famous orphans that lost their mother. And he goes, okay. And up comes hundreds of names from Sir Isaac Newton and Tycho Brahe, and just the names go on. And then I said, do you know any of these names? And he goes, yeah, a few of them. I said, let's go look up these names. And these are the most powerful, most influential contributors on the planet through history. And they start out just like him. And I said, listen, you're not a victim of history. This is an opportunity. You're in this category. And he all of a sudden just got tears in his eyes. His kind of heart opened up and he goes, I mean, I'm special. Yes. That has nothing to do with anything except what your perception of that is. I said, I just now changed your perception of what happened to you. And now you're in a new category of great achievers. So instead of sitting there playing victim of history and being told that that's the reason why your life screwed up, why not say that this is why your life is destined to do something great? So just a perception change. And it just changed the trajectory. He all of a sudden took off in school. He automatically decided he's going to do something. And he wanted to go and thank the people who is his mother and father for being exactly who they are. Anybody you can't say thank you for is baggage. Anything you can say thank you for is fuel. So it's just a perception. You have control over perceptions, decisions, and actions, and you can change your perception of anything that's ever happened to you in your life. And so if you want to be a victim of history and run the external world did this to me, and blame the external world and live in a causality of that, you're not going to grow and not going to be empowered. But when you take command and realize the cause of that wasn't what happened out there, it's your perception of what happened out there. And now what you decide to do with it and the actions you take from it. Now you have control over that. That's what you have control of. You don't have control of anything out there. You have control of that. And that's where I try to help people master their life. Take command of what you have control over, perceptions, decisions, and actions, and learn how to be resourceful and use whatever's happened in your life to do something extraordinary.
Before we change gears onto a slightly different topic, I'm just curious, what questions would you ask? Like you said, you've got control over the perspective, which I totally agree. And I know you teach when you hit that balance point, that's when you experience enlightenment. Like you never become fully enlightened, but you have moments of enlightenment. I'm just curious, what are some of your go-to questions? I know there's obviously heaps that you can ask, but what are like some really simple ones where, like, say the average person listening to this, they're just going day to day and they get really stressed, or they get really judgmental and they judge their coworker, their boss, their partner, they get angry, they experience a lopsided perception. What are some really quality questions that they can ask themselves in that moment to help them kind of self-regulate their perspective so they're not as triggered during the day? I don't know if that made sense, that question, but any go-to questions?
Yeah, sure. Well, anytime you're not living by your highest value, where the blood glucose and oxygen goes into the forebrain and executive functioning center, which is the prefrontal cortex, where you have objectivity, where you're neutral, where you're resilient and adaptable, and you're resourceful, you're going to end up in the amygdala. And the amygdala is avoid pain, seek pleasure. It's a survival mentality where you judge, because you're judging. If it's a prey, you got to seek it, or if it's a predator, you're going to avoid it. So you're constantly judging and on survival mode. And the autonomic nervous system is lateralized and one's dominating over the other one. So the question that will work in every case is whatever the opposite of what you're perceiving. So if you're perceiving something to infatuate with, and you're looking at putting somebody on a pedestal, and you're conscious of the upsides and unconscious of the downsides, your intuition is trying to prompt you to become aware of the unconscious to make you fully conscious. And you can ask what your intuition is trying to do by asking, what are the downsides of the individual you're infatuated with? Because you're infatuated, you're blind to downsides. What are the downsides? Make you aware. And the same thing when you're resenting somebody. When you resent somebody, you're conscious of the downsides and unconscious of the upsides. Your intuition is trying to point out the upsides. What's the meaning of this? How is this helping me? And you add the benefits. And once the benefits equal the drawbacks and balance, these things out there don't run you. See, anything you resent occupies space and time in your mind and runs you. Anything that you infatuate occupies space and time in your mind and runs you. When you're perfectly balanced, you run you. Otherwise, you're extrinsically driven by prey and predator mentality, seeking fantasies, avoiding nightmares. And that area, the Buddha says, the desire for that which is unobtainable, the prey, and the desire to avoid that which is unavoidable, the predator, is a source of human suffering. So people are trapped in that mentality of moral hypocrisies, of labeling people one-sided, narcissist, mean, cruel, instead of looking at a human being and seeing both sides of them and asking the questions to become aware of what you're overlooking. And I've yet to see anything the mortal body can experience that the immortal soul, the authentic self, can't love. And anything you don't love is going to preoccupy your mind and run your life as noise, and it's going to keep weighing you down until you get on and find out how it served you. So I'm a firm believer in neutralizing the mind, asking quality questions, which is what I call the Demartini method. It's a very precise set of questions that equilibrate the mind on anything you're perceiving that's distracting you from being present and empowered doing what you love. And there's a science to it. It's not really that rocket science, as I said. It's a very, very clear set of questions that liberate people from emotions. And I do it every week. I do it almost every day. And I watch transformations in people's lives. It's well, you know what I'm talking about. You have an idea what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's just a funny story. I actually, when I read the Breakthrough Experience, I read it last year when I got introduced to your work, and I bought all of my family members a copy of the Breakthrough Experience for Christmas just to get them starting to understand the things that are taught in that book. I truly believe I was on a podcast I think last week, and they asked me a question at the end: what's your number one personal development book? And it's without a hesitation, it's the Breakthrough Experience, because of what you said. There's no doubt. There's no guesswork. It's like if you do the process and you can see exactly how everything is serving you, it has its upsides, it has its downsides. I don't know if you've really got an answer for this question, but it's like there's part of me of saying like, why is this not well known? Why is this not more well known by everyone? This shit should be taught in schools to remove judgment from people's perspectives, not how to figure out the length of a triangle, like to actually help people remove judgment of people themselves, their parents, whatever it is that they're judging. I know obviously that ties into your life's mission and why you're here, but it's just, I wish this was more well known. So I'm just curious why, I don't really know where that is a question, but why do so many people aren't conscious of this stuff, like that things are serving them, but I guess they default to blame, they default to victim, they default to taking on that as a limiting belief rather than, oh, how is this serving me? How is this helping me achieve my mission? How is this moving me forward? So I'm just curious why you think most people default to the first answer and blame.
Oh, there's a beautiful answer to that, a bit long. I'll tackle it. First of all, thousands of years ago, let's just say the first man and woman that were probably ever on the planet, That's an interesting question. If you never thought about this, was there just one man and then a woman, or a woman and then a man? Did they come at the same time? Did they appear? Did they come from monkeys? Did they get created individually? Were they in one location, multiple locations? It's an interesting question to tackle. And if so, did they multiply? And was it incestual originally when they actually had made love with their own kids? Or was there some other family starting on at the same time? And these are all questions that are very interesting questions. But eventually, they realized that they didn't do well by themselves out in the wild compared if they did if they had another group with them, because some people were better at one thing and some people greater at another. So some people made baskets really well, and somebody made clothes well, and somebody cooked well, and somebody made houses well, and that kind of thing. So then when clanships, family kinships occurred, and then clans, and then townships, and then communities, and then cities, and then eventually states were born. And there was a social structure when they started planting instead of, hunting and gathering kind of thing. Now we start having a social structure, and now there's so many specialties that you're almost dependent on other people, and you don't want to be rejected by them, and you don't want to lose them, because if you're banished out there by yourself, you won't do well. So therefore, there's a built-in instinct, a fear of rejection, and a fear of abandonment, and a fear of those things sitting in people, and an impulse to try to please people and be liked and to be proud in the social structure, because you got more advantage as you went up. So this led to our amygdala survival mentality, is the addiction to food, the addiction to praise, the addiction to kind of a high social status. And so anything that might allow you to do that, you get addicted to, and an instinct away from being rejected by the majority. And that's where the collective herd, control people. And now you've got a religion, you've got a politics, you've got a big company or whatever, and the big daddy, there were the big authority systems come in, and you don't want to lose those positions, so you end up subordinating to that. And that is part of the issue that starts this whole ball rolling, because now we're frightened of not fitting into the mothers, the fathers, the preachers, the teachers, the mores, the conventions and traditions of those groups. It starts out with mommy, not pleasing mommy. We're frightened we're going to die. That eventually becomes not fitting into society. You're going to be abandoned. And so these are built into instinctually and impulsively into the human being. And very few people have the courage to walk an independent life, an individual hero, and be an original thinker and challenge it and set up a new paradigm. But inevitably, that's the only thing that actually progresses society, is the misfit, as Steve Jobs says. So somebody, one out of thousands, end up rising up and walking, you might say, a different path, an unborrowed visionary, as Ayn Rand describes, and giving themselves permission to be different and to think different and to create a new way, an innovative idea. And most people will ridicule it, violently oppose it, and try to stab it and keep it from doing it, because it undermines their comfort zone. And so people are sitting there and they're frightened of being rejected and frightened of making a mistake to the herd. And all these things add up to where we are today. Majority of people, if all of a sudden you go outside the norm, and the norm is the victim mentality. You don't see mastery and things on TV, the mass media. You see victim mentality all over there, So I anytime you have moral hypocrisies of one-sidedness, you're supposed to be nice, never mean, kind, never cruel, positive, never negative, peace, never war. No human being can live that way. It's a moral hypocrisy. So you end up beating yourself up, wondering what's wrong with me. And then you look for some escape, superhero, whatever, to do it. And they go to baseball games or football games or soccer games or religious institutions or something, trying to find that outside hero who supposedly has conquered this and lived this ideal life that doesn't have any reality. We eventually find out these people are just human beings. And so people are trapped in that, and they don't realize that. So somebody like me comes along and introduces a new paradigm. It's a bit shaking. It challenges people. They're used to the victim thinking. The victim sings on Dr. Phil and Oprah and all these other things. It's on TV, it's at your church, it's everywhere else. And here comes this Lone Ranger with a new paradigm that says, no, there's nothing that's happened in your life that isn't part of the perfection of your life, and everything is on the way, not in the way. That's not norm. That's different. But we have reached billions of people. with radio and television, newspapers and podcasts and magazines and webinars and all those things. We have reached millions and millions and millions of people. And we do have thousands of people using the work. So it's like, you never underestimate the significance of a small group of people for changing the world. It's the only thing that ever has. Margaret Mead said that in her work. And that's what's happening. And it is happening. And it is getting into schools and it is graduate doing. But it takes sometimes 30 to 40 or 50 or sometimes 60 or even longer years to get into a movement. And I must say, instead of me following a culture, I'd rather build a culture. So I'm building a culture of people that are receptive to new ideas. And you have to go sometimes to the youth to hear it, because the older people have their old ways, but the youth people are more receptive to tackling that. But it is happening. It is getting into schools. It is happening in families. And it's just slower than maybe, it's because you're aware and you see things so quickly. You say, well, why can't people see this? It is happening, but it's slow.
Is that your mission to teach that, to teach, I know everything's on the way, not in the way, to teach balance? Is that your mission? Is that what it is that you've set out to conquer?
Well, there's a lot of facets to my mission. It's a big diamond with lots of facets. But one of the things that I had a dream about doing at age 18, I just come back from Hawaii and I was watching David Carradine on Kung Fu show. There's a weekly show that came out called Kung Fu. And he had this master, Chinese kind of Shaolin temple master, right? And he was like the wise man. And he wanted to be the master. And the term master came to me and I went, wow, that'd be cool. I think I'd like to master my life. And I wanted to master whatever I was doing. And so then I decided, okay, what does that look like? And I said, I want to master all 7 areas of my life. I want to master my mental capacities, my business capacities, my wealth capacities, my family capacities, social, physical, and spirituality. And so I just started to design my life, what I defined a master to be, to exemplify that life, and set out to create that. I master planned that out for how I wanted to live my life. And I help other people do it according to what they value. They're going to be different, but whatever is masterful to them. And I realized that that's what I love doing. I wanted to do it narcissistically. I wanted to do it so I could be masterful of my own life. I didn't want to be a victim of the history. I wanted to be a master of destiny, because I was a victim of a misperception when I was young. And then I had a new perception and I realized that was not true. I'm able to read. I'm able to do this stuff. So I thought it'd be lovely to be able to help other people get past whatever they've inculcated into their thinking by outside authorities and get a bigger picture. So I set out to master my life. And I knew from Zig Ziglar when I was 20, that if I help other people do the same and master their life, I get to master mine. So I went on a mission to, how do I most effectively and efficiently serve ever greater numbers of people? And I sat down and I wrote down, how do I reach people? Radio, television, newspapers, magazines, writing books, doing live seminars, doing one-on-ones, whatever it would take. And then social media came, and then the internet and all that came. And I just kept expanding everything that allowed me to reach people. I started incorporating. And I've been on a mission of that this is going on the 50th year.
That's incredible.
And we've reached a lot of people. Yeah.
I'm curious, John, you've mentioned this before, and this is actually something I've actually have very little research in. I'd love to hear your sort of 2 cents on it. You speak about universal laws a fair bit. I've heard you mention about them. I was just curious if you could give us a bit of an insight into what are universal laws, and maybe your top couple that really would add value to people if they understood the basics of it and how it shows up in their life. Because this is actually something I'm very uneducated on, and I'd love to learn from you about it.
Yep. In one of my programs that's on leadership, I address that topic. When I first heard the word universal law, I was 17, the night I met Paul Bragg. I had no idea what it was. When I got back to Texas and I asked my mom, what exactly is universal law? And she says, that you're gonna have to look up. I don't know. And I looked up universal law, and it referred to natural law. It referred to Aristotle. And it was the laws of the universe, right? The natural laws of nature. And I thought, okay, laws of nature, laws of the universe, same thing. Because in those days, the world, the geocentric world, was the universe, the center of the universe. So they perceived that anything that was a natural law of the world became a natural law of the universe, because that was the universe. We had a very finite world, the fixed stars, Ptolemy had. And so I started there. Then that led me to study a thing called the logos. The logos was the underlying reason within the universe that was like the word. In the theological construct, the word of God was like the word. That was the law of the universe, the governing laws of the universe. So that turned to logos. And then I started studying the logos. It meant the word, it meant reason, it meant the order of the universe, things like that. And then that led me to ologies, all the different ologies, all the different disciplines. So I made a list. By the time I was 18, I made a list of every known ology and discipline I could find. You know, chemistry, mathematics, all the sciences, everything, philosophy, theology, anything. And I made a list of them, and I categorized them first alphabetically. And I said, okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to read 100 books on every one of those topics. And now that's over 300 different individual disciplines that I've done. And so what I basically did that because that way I could find the most universal principles extracted from there. Because if there are certain universal laws, that means they must be found in all those different disciplines. So a universal law is something that occurs in the micro and the macro and anywhere in between, including human behavior, and it will be found in every discipline. That was the objective. So that led me to try to find what that is. And I found one. And it was called the law of the one to many. The law of the one and the many. And now Mortimer Adler in his Syntopican volumes 1 and 2 described this. So you can go and look it up there as one source. But it says from the one come the many, and from the many come the one. And I found that was one of the laws that applied in every discipline I studied. So let me give you an example, then I'll bring it to human behavior. In cosmology, we supposedly have a Big Bang, right? That's one of the cosmic models that we have today. It's at least one of them. It's not an absolute truth. It's just a model. But from this one so-called almost singularity kind of infinite potentiality kind of state, one comes many. All the atoms, all the eventually the gases, the stars, the planets, etc. The many. Eventually, those get absorbed and eventually turned into a black hole back to the one. So from the one come the many, and from the many come the one. So from a cosmological picture, you see that law. And Roger Penrose, a Nobel Prize winner, in his ekpyrotic, recycling model, he's actually describing that. What's interesting, and that was also described in the Vedic text, ancient Vedic text, and other writers. But then I started looking at the most universal laws that we also acknowledge. Gravity is a law that applies in all domains, from macro to micro, even though in the micro it's really, really insignificant, but in the macro it gets significant, but it's still there. So it's universal. But gravity takes the infinite many and converts it into one, and gravitationally contracts it. And radiation, which is electromagnetism, which is James Clerk Maxwell wrote his 4 partial differential equations for that. And that's from the point source of light outward towards the infinite radii. So now we go from one to many and many to one. And so the radiation of light from a star eventually turns into a black hole and recycles itself, you might say. There's a life cycle to stars. And we know the Milky Way actually recycles these stars and actually prints new ones out there. So there's the one and the many in astronomy. In the subatomic world, back in the smallest world, you have what they call Planck's dimensional quantum vacuum. And the quantum vacuum has emerging particles and antiparticles, and then they submerge. From the one quantum vacuum comes these uncertain principled particles and antiparticles, and then from them, they go back. So from one to many, many to one. You see the same thing, and when you look at atoms, they disperse and ionize, and then they come back and recombine. You see it in molecular chemistry, you see atoms joining together and dispersing, and they're SN1 and E1 relationships. You see this in larger molecules with oxidation and reduction. You see this in larger biomolecules, assemblage and disassemblage. And then you see it in cells, you see it in mitosis and apoptosis. You go into cell tissues, you see tissues plastically modeling, building and destroying. As it's building, it's trying to unify. If it's destroying, it's trying to break apart. So this law, whether it's a calculus or integral calculus, was integration, or calculus, which is differentiation, one to many, many to one. You see it in every discipline. You see attraction and repulsion. When it's attracted, it's going towards oneness. With repulsion, it's the other way. So electrostatic forces are done that way. Nuclear force, the gluons are holding together the quarks to make protons and nucleons, and the electron is dissipated out, and that's broken apart in this weak nuclear force. So you can see that this applies everywhere we go at all scales. In society, you have what they call the one to many. You have a monarchy and a democracy. If a monarchy becomes a tyrant, a revolution of a democracy comes in. If a democracy comes in, everybody's trying to do their own thing. They can't make a decision. Somebody has to stand out and rise out of it to become a leader in there to make a decision. So the one to many work in social structures. In the individual, you got one soul and many personas and mass. And out of the soul comes many personas, and out of the personas returns to the soul, the evolution of our personal development. If you look in marriage, you see marriage and divorce going on in the world. It's about 50-50. There's people coming together, there's people going apart. When you're dating the many, you're searching for the special one. When you got the one, you're wondering about the many. So I could go over and over on the social structure, chemistry, mathematics. Mathematics has addition and subtraction, multiplication and division. This law of the one to many is the most universal law that we've been able to find. And it's basically magnificently found in every study. Geology, you have plumes blowing apart, that's expanding things, separating them into many. And then you got what you call plunges that are taking it down and condensing it back to the one. In meteorology, you got heat rising and expanding it to the many. And then you got cool at the poles, bringing it back and condensing it back. So one is expansion, one's contraction. This law I've seen in every discipline so far studied, 300 different disciplines, that same law is there. So that's the most universal law I found in human behavior.
And how would someone who just listened to this, how would that be useful or practical for what they could apply in their own life, and if possible at all, besides just, I guess, knowing the general knowledge of it, just maybe some consciousness that they could take away from what you just said? Because like, I was enjoying every word that you said, and my pen was not able to keep up, so I just ended up just listening. And how would someone who's just heard that and be like, holy shit, that sounds great, I don't know what to do with it, how would someone use that universal law and actually make it practical for themselves, even if it's just a little tidbit that they can use day to day?
Sure. When you infatuate with somebody, you see more similarities. Another way of saying the law of the one to many is called the law of similars and differences. So when you see similarities of people, you're attracted to them and you infatuate them. So think about a relationship you've had. You're highly infatuated. You go, oh my God, we have the same number of eyes, same number of ribs, same number of teeth, same number of arms and legs. We must be soulmates. You see similarities more than differences. You find what's common instead of what's different, and you move towards oneness and unification. I want to be one with you. I don't want to be away from you. And then when you have resentment, which is inevitable because they don't live up to the fantasy, then you see more differences and similarities. And we go, we just don't see eye to eye. We're going two different directions. We don't have anything in common. And now we break apart. And so for every individual that's joining together, there's somebody breaking apart. And that's the law in just a human society. Now, what's interesting is when you are attracted to anything, it doesn't matter what it is, any area of your life that you're attracted to something, you're trying to unify and attract to it, that's a unification force. But in the process, whatever its opposite is, you're avoiding. So if you infatuate with somebody who's intelligent, you'll avoid an ignorant person. If you infatuate with somebody who's tall, you'll avoid the short one. Whatever you infatuate with and admire, the opposite will become something you'll walk away from and despise. So you're constantly doing the one and the many at any moment in your life. And so if you can become aware of those similarities, Wilhelm Wundt, who was one of the early founding fathers of psychology, said that there's simultaneous contrast in very awakened people and sequential contrast in people who are unaware. The sequential contrast is you're infatuated, and then weeks later, months later, you're then resent them. If you see both of them at the same time, you get to love them. Love is a balance of the law of the one to many. Love is a balance of similars and differences. Love is a balance of support and challenge. And love is prey. If you eat prey food, you're trying to be one. And it's kind of like an endomorphosis. You're bringing in that food into your body and making it one. And you're seeking out that oneness. And then you're trying to get away from the predator. So that's a manyness. So there's many applications in daily life. Anything that we're attracted, we're supported by, we infatuate with, we're going towards oneness. But guess what? We discover that that's not who they are. The person we infatuate with, we're blind to the downsides, and we eventually discover that there's things in there that we don't want to get along with, and there's differences, but we're blind to it. And then we resent somebody, we actually want to get away from them, but then we eventually discovered that they actually served us, and then we want to thank them. So nature is constantly trying to bring the one and the many into perfect balance. The similars and differences, the peace and war, that's another name for it, peace and war, unity, diversity, marriage and divorce, like and dislike, attract and repel. Even when we deal with prejudice in our amygdala, and we have people in crowd, out crowd, right? We join this group, we want to be against this other group. All the tribal constructs of the social in crowds and out crowds, or my religion is better than your religion, or my culture is better than your culture, or my country is better than yours. There's always somebody who's playing the other side. There's always a in crowd and out crowd. That's the law of the one and many. So I could go on and on. In your physiology, your sympathetic nervous system is breaking things down catabolically, and the anabolic parasympathetics building things up and unifying it. One's a builder, one's a destroyer. You have that inside your physiology. You can't avoid that. You also have inside the very cells themselves, the assemblage and disassemblage of molecules based on this law of the one and many. And you have pride, where you build yourself up, and you have shame. You tear yourself down and water yourself down. You have both of those mechanisms sitting in your psyche.
I'm having like so many light bulbs as you're talking. I'm just like, yes, you're right. I see that. I do that as well. Yes, yes, yes. I got two more questions. I'm just very conscious of our time. I wanted to ask you a little bit about relationships, and then a shorter question to finish it off. Is I see so many people, in my belief as well, that I think I've learned it from you or some other teachers I've been researching lately, is that they speak a lot like your relationships reveal the parts of you that you haven't worked on or you haven't learned to love yet. And on the other side, relationships are fucking hard. Like there's a lot of people that can't handle them. They're picking the wrong person. They're infatuated with their partner. They're not seeing the downsides. I just curious from your perspective, what's like the overall reason you feel such a large percentage of relationships don't work out, and what, I guess, tips or tricks or rules that you have for helping people find the right person, make the wiser decision, be conscious of the downsides at the start, anything like that involving relationships?
Well, this is going to shock everybody who's listening, so just go ahead and hold on to your chair. But we're starting out with the idea that every relationship is supposed to last. That's a presupposition that's not necessarily the way that the universe is working. The universe has build and destroy built into it, and marriage and divorces are about 50-50 across the planet. So that's not a mistake. That's not a flaw. It's not a weakness. It's not you screwed up. It's life's message. And so, in fact, you and your person that you love, you're going to build him and destroy him. I've never met anybody that's been married for any period of time that didn't feel like I want to hug him and slug him. He goes back and forth. Sometimes I want to hug him. Sometimes I want to slug him. Yeah. Sometimes they build me up. Sometimes they tear me apart. That is part of the equation. Law of the one and many is going to be in every relationship. If you're not prepared for that, when you live in your amygdala, you want a one-sided world. You want to avoid the predator and seek the prey. And as long as you're in that mode, you're going to have this idea that they're supposed to be more similars than differences. And if they're different, oh my God, it's not working out. And that we're always supposed to be together and never apart. That's another fantasy. So the first thing to do is to transcend the idea that it has to be one and only. And then if it didn't work out, it failed. Because that's not it. Did you learn something? I'd rather come from the perspective, did you learn something from this relationship? And are you more authentic than when you started? And did you grasp insights about yourself? Or are you holding on to a fantasy and now you're blaming this person for the wounds? Because if you did, you didn't get the lesson. But what I tell people to do is do the method, the Demartini method, by asking a simple question. What specific trait, action, inaction do I perceive this individual displaying or demonstrating that I am now despising most or admiring most? And then go and look inside yourself. Okay, self, go inside, go to a moment where and when I have displayed and demonstrated the same perceived trait, action, inaction that I admired or despised in them, and go find it in you. Because you're not going to resent somebody on the outside unless they're reminding you of something in you that you're too proud to admit, but you're actually done that you're ashamed of. That's why you're resenting them. And the only reason you're going to be admiring them is because they're reminding you of something you're too humble to admit, but you actually have inside, but you're not honoring it. And when you finally realize that you have everything you see in them, you calm down your judgment, you get to appreciate them for who they are and what the role they're playing in making you aware of the parts you're denying. When you get to love that, you can appreciate them. But at the same time, it doesn't mean you have to be with them. You can love somebody and have an amazing loving relationship, not be married to them. And you can also be married to somebody and not have to have it last forever. There's no rules. I love this lady that came up to me when she was 94 years old. I was on my ship and I was down in Belfast, Ireland, and my wife was still alive at the time. And this lady comes up to me. She's 94 years old. She just climbed Mount Kilimanjaro the week before. 94. And she comes in and she says, "I'm looking for a man to take me to the theater." And she comes up to me and she said, "Young man, are you available to take me to the theater?" I was about 48 at the time. And she said, "Can you take me to the theater?" And I said, "Well, let me ask my wife. Hold on a minute." I said, "Honey, can I take this lovely lady to the theater?" She looked at her and said, "Absolutely. Go for it." So we went to dinner, came back. After dinner, I was going to take her to the theater. Well, I meet her downstairs. And when I get there, she didn't just have me there. She had two other guys. She had three men to take her to the theater. And I thought, well, that's a frisky little babe, right? She's got some chutzpah. So she has three guys, and they all kind of went, "Oh, I thought I was the only one taking. Oh, I guess we're all taking them." So she has three guys taken to the theater. We go to the theater. The whole time she's there, she's going about her life. And she says, "I've been married 5 times. All of my husbands died making love with me." And I thought, man, I ain't going there. And in the process of doing that, she had 5 husbands, each one wealthier. And she has like $300 million because of this. And she's traveling the world. She had 30 years worth of goals. She was more alive than most 94-year-olds. Half the people 20 years younger were not as energized as her. And I thought, well, wow, that's an amazing life. And then I looked back at my grandparents who were married 78 years and had kind of an average ending on their life. They kind of looked alike. They could probably cross-dress. You would know which is which because they looked like each other after a while. And they were 100, 101 when they died. And I sat there and I looked at them and I said, here's a completely different model of life. And here's a model of life. I can't honestly say that's the right one or that one's the wrong one or whatever, because that's a moral hypocrisy that some religion or politics made up in their minds. The question is are they getting a fulfilled life? Are they inspired by what they do? Are they doing something amazing? What's the overall outcome here? I couldn't tell you which was greater. So watch out for the box, because we sometimes live in a little local area. We get indoctrinated by a certain paradigm. We think that's what it is. We don't get to see the world, and we see thousands of different paradigms around the world. And when you go around the world, I've been to 163 countries. I've seen all kinds of belief systems out there and how it's supposed to be and should be and ought to be and all that. And I go, you know what? I can make a composite, the greatest of all of that, and make what I want out of it. I'm free to create my own life. And then it may not, if you want to get married 20 times, go for it. If you want to get married one time, great. I wouldn't be infatuated with one or the other. I would just say, here's an adventure. Some people, there's some people that never get married. Are they bad people or wrong people or mixed up people? No, it's just different. So just give yourself permission to not be in a box and don't judge what you're doing. It's a journey, and learn to love whatever's happened and how you learn from it and how you can make another step forward in the magnificence of your life each time. But do learn from what you've gone through. If you keep finding yourself going after a fantasy and you keep getting slammed by the opposite, wake up and get the lesson. But at the same time, don't judge yourself for, you failed because your marriage didn't last or something. That's crazy. My mom came to me and she says, "I got a secret for you, son." I said, "What is it?" I said, "Don't tell your dad I'm telling you," because he was a Catholic and he wanted people to think I was a virgin. But I was never a virgin. I was married before I met your dad. I said, "You were?" And she goes, "Yeah." And she pulled out a box of all these pictures of her when she was young and she was a hottie. I said, "Mom, you were a hottie." And she goes, "Yeah, I was an act again." And I said, "And Dad told me all these other things." He said, "Yeah, that's the Catholic upbringing, whatever." And I said, "So tell me about this. Keep going." And she said, "Yeah, if it wasn't for the relationship I had that didn't quite go the way I was hoping or whatever, and I had a lot of lessons to learn and some fantasies to break, and he taught me that, and I'm grateful. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have met your dad. And now, as a result of that, we are and you are existing." And I thought, wow, if it wasn't for that separation and that breakup, I wouldn't even be in existence. So I don't put a moral hypocrisy on some sort of how it's supposed to be. I don't find that very productive. I just ask, how is it that whatever's happening, how is it helping me fulfill what I feel is my mission on this planet?
Incredible insight, John. Thank you so much. We are now pushed for time. We're done. John, I just want to say thank you so much for your time and your energy and your presence. If anyone would like to reach out or find you or contact you or just absorb your content or connect with you, where can they find you? What's their best place to go to?
Just simply drdemartini.com. That's where they can go and do the value determination process to determine what they really value in life on there, complimentary and free. And that's where they can go and just take advantage of just a vast amount of educational content that's sitting there. They could probably spend the rest of their life just sitting there watching YouTubes and reading articles and newspapers and magazines and TV shows and whatever's on there. So that's a resource for education for people to do and master their life.
I love it. I watch your YouTube videos on a weekly basis. Very, very deep, meaningful stuff. I'm a big fan. So thank you for watching, guys. Thank you for tuning in. If you got some value, please share with a friend, subscribe, leave your comments below, and I'll see you guys on the very next episode. Thank you, John.